In this webinar, we're going to talk about overcoming resistance, meltdowns, control patterns, and other issues that come up at night. What you will learn is why strong feelings, resistance, defiance, and meltdowns can actually happen at the time, how to help babies and younger children sleep better through the night, how to recognize and respond to control patterns at bedtimes, a simple meditation that you can teach children to help them relax and fall asleep better at night, common mistakes to avoid when setting up graceful bedtimes, and how to set limits at bedtime without being harsh using democratic parenting. So first off, who am I? What makes me an expert on child behavior, and why should you listen to me? My name is Dr. Blaise Ryan. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine. That means that I treat the root cause of disease, not just the symptoms. And when I became a parent myself, my training led me to question the standard approaches to parenting, from the old school authoritarian approach to the modern day permissive approach to parenting. And I thought to myself, might there not be an easier way, a less stressful way for both parent and child? So in my earnest desire to be the best father that I could possibly be, and also through seeing many patients in my clinic who are struggling with traumas that they incurred in their childhood, I started to do a lot of research into child behavior, child development, and child psychology. And as such, I founded Child Brain Health and the Parent Learning Club. Most of my research around parenting and a more democratic style of parenting is written in my book called Democratic Parenting, which is available on Amazon.com or on our website at parentlearningclub.com. I'm also the creator of the ADD/ADHD Transformation Program, which is an online program that helps you overcome the behaviors associated with attention deficit disorder without using medication, using a lot of the democratic parenting methods that I talk about in my book. Okay, so let's talk about bedtime. So bedtime marks a transition from wakefulness to sleep, from active consciousness to passive unconsciousness, from external attention to internal reflection, from thinking to feeling, from control to release. So if you think about it, bedtime is a very important transition in all of our lives. And the goal of this webinar is to help talk about what are those things that interrupt the graceful transition from this wakefulness to this sleep time, from the active stimulus to more passive rejuvenation that we get with our sleep. And how can we help our children sleep better through the night to get more rejuvenating sleep so they wake up more refreshed and ready to tackle the day ahead of them? And also, how can we overcome the problems that often come up at nighttime before bed? Well, let's take a look at why many children struggle with this transition. When bedtime transitions bring up strong feelings in children, if they start to have meltdowns or tantrums, or just try and resist it, or if you notice different control patterns coming into play, or night phobias, anxieties, fears, and even nightmares, we know that if any of these strong feelings come up, that stress is a major cause of this. Now here, I define stress as being internal tension, pressure, or irritation caused by unprocessed feelings, experiences, stimulation, pollution, information, or hurts. And the key word here is unprocessed. So now, how do we know if a child has stress and it's one of the causes that we're dealing with? Well, we can look at childhood stress disorder to get a clue. Now, with childhood stress disorder, we have 4 causes and a variety of signs and symptoms to help us figure out if stress is the cause of the behavioral problems that we're witnessing. So what is childhood stress disorder? Well, a disorder is defined as a disturbance, a lack of order, a deviation from the normal, or manifestations of off-track symptoms or behavior. So at nighttime, if we're trying to transition our children to bed harmoniously and gracefully, and if they start to act out or behave in difficult ways, off-track or abnormal ways, if strong feelings or emotions or meltdown happens, we know that this is a disturbance and a deviation from their normal behavior that would be indicative of a happy and healthy child without tension or stress. So the signs and symptoms of childhood stress disorder. So there's a lot of different symptoms that can come up when children do get stressed. Now, childhood stress disorder is a reflection of an ongoing or intense stress or trauma that happens in the child's life. And as I indicated here, stress again is defined as an internal tension, pressure, or irritation caused by unprocessed feelings, experiences, stimulation, pollution, information, or hurts. Okay? So it can be a variety of different causes. We'll get into some of the deeper causes shortly here, but it's important for us to realize that these symptoms of stress can manifest in many different ways. And I'm just going to review some of the overall signs and symptoms of childhood stress disorder to help us understand if stress is really a major factor that we're dealing with when our child is starting to misbehave. So some of the signs and symptoms we may see are children who act distracted or forgetful, hyperactive, or may have difficulty concentrating or paying attention, which we commonly see with children who are dealing with ADD or ADHD. Defiant children, angry, easily annoyed or upset. Children who have temper tantrums or angry outbursts, who become needy, clingy, or are demanding. Or sometimes children are whiny, or sometimes they withdraw inward and become shy and timid when they're overcome by stress. Other children will show a poor spatial awareness or become clumsy and will become prone to accidents because they're not paying attention of where they are in the world around them. Other signs and symptoms can manifest as bedwetting, nightmares, sleep problems, night panics and anxieties, tummy aches, abdominal pains with no apparent physical cause. This refers to if you take your child in to see a doctor and they can't find anything physically wrong with the abdominal pains, it may be childhood stress. It may also be something physical, so it's important to do our due diligence with this, but it can be also caused by childhood stress where children will indicate that they have tummy aches and pains and stuff like that. Bullying, aggression, violence, hitting, kicking, biting, pinching is very common for children who are overwhelmed with tension and stress. Power struggles, children who are argumentative or backtalk and lie may become oppositional, may have ODD. They may have control patterns or develop repetitive movements or obsessive habits or ritualistic behaviors. Other signs are that they may avoid eye contact or be unresponsive to social engagement. They may refuse to share with other children and have a reduced sense of empathy. And these are some behaviors we often see with children who have autism spectrum disorder or Asperger's or autistic type behaviors. Also, we can tell if a child is overwhelmed with stress by hearing a certain desperation in their voice and in their requests. They may be on the verge of tears, or they may have meltdowns over small things. Young children may have a glazed look in their eyes, or sometimes they have dark circles around their eyes. And otherwise, at other times, they might appear more agitated or have a tense or anxious look in their eyes. So just by looking inside a child's eyes, we can often get a glimpse of their emotional state. And if they are overcome with pressure, with tension, or stress by looking inside their eyes, some children will turn inward and will have a glazed look. Others will turn outward and have a more agitated or anxious look in their eyes. They may have constant requests or whining. They may be naggy or bratty. They may complain or be uncooperative. Or they may be hard to please and easy to upset. So a lot of these behaviors can come up at nighttime when we're trying to put our children to bed. And then we may, at that point, we can deduce that a child might have an accumulation of stress. But first, in order for us to really understand if our child is overwhelmed with stress and if childhood stress disorder is a factor, we need to understand what might have caused the stress. And oftentimes, if we can just look at our child's life and look at it from their perspective, take an objective view of their overall environment, then we can get a clue whether or not stress is a factor. Now, in my book, Democratic Parenting, I talk quite extensively about how to help children heal from stress, because the democratic parenting is all about giving children, meeting the children's underlying needs. And a big need that goes unmet today in children is their need for autonomy, which is often why children will rebel and become defiant and hard to discipline, is because their need for autonomy, if it's unmet, will cause them to do that. Now, autonomy is met through giving children choice. But you see, the thing is, if children are overwhelmed with stress, then their higher thinking functions are turned off because of what's called amygdala hijacking. This is a survival instinct. When stress becomes overwhelming, the children will turn inward, and the amygdala center of the brain, which is often called the lizard brain, which is purely instinctual, will take over, and the higher thinking processes of the outer cortex of the brain are turned off because of this hijacking effect. As such, children often don't have intelligent and conscious choice over their actions. So even if we talk to them about their behaviors and lecture them and pull them aside, even when they're calm, and talk to them about how they're behaving and about the nighttime transitions, and we get their agreement to make nighttime easier, that won't stop them from still engaging in a meltdown or having some emotional upheaval at night if stress and tension is one of the underlying causes, because they have no conscious control over it, because these emotions trigger the amygdala. Okay, so what we can do oftentimes is to take an objective view at our child's overall situation and environment and get a clue whether or not stress might be a factor. To help us with this, we have these 4 causes of childhood stress, which I talk about in my book, Democratic Parenting. The first one is called aggressive stress, which is caused by aggressive types of trauma. Now, these can be due from being hurt by a sibling or another child, or sometimes in abusive situations if a child is abused, or even if child are yelled at or scolded. That's kind of like an aggressive insult to the child's integrity and well-being. And especially if it does come from the parent, if a parent scolds their child or yells at them, that aggressivity can also trigger their instinctual response, the fight or flight instinct, because they feel deep down inside that their connection to their parent is broken. And connection is the most important need for children, simply because of survival. It's an instinctual aspect where children know deep down inside instinctually that their very survival depends upon their connection to their parents, because it's the parents who take care of them, who feed them, and who make sure that they have everything they need in order to grow. And many children would quite simply not survive if they weren't well connected to their parents or the adult caregiver. So anything that threatens their sense of connection basically triggers their survival instinct and the fight or flight response and the amygdala hijacking. So if a parent becomes aggressive and scolds and yells or shouts at their child, a certain degree of repression happens for that child, but the aggressive trauma remains. And this can accumulate, and if the child isn't given a chance to fully process that hurt, it will remain an influential factor in their behavior and affect their overall thinking. So this falls under the aggressive type of stress. We also have passive stress. Now, passive stress is really the pressure of unmet needs. So if we look at what our children really need, we can get a clue about what might cause this type of passive stress. Just for example, if a child isn't getting enough sleep, which all children and humans need sleep in order to be healthy and functional, then their system will be stressed because they're not getting the sleep and the rejuvenation that they need from the sleep. And over time, this will build up and might cause them to have a harder time focusing and paying attention during the day. It might be more irritable and emotional sometimes if they're tired. And so we can trace back sometimes their behavior to these different unmet needs. And I've isolated 15 different childhood developmental needs, which I can't really go to in depth in this webinar because I spend a whole other webinar just on that subject. If you go to our website, parentlearningclub.com/members, you can get access to the webinar on the 15 childhood needs if you want more details in it. But it's just important, a lot of these needs are very obvious, like the need for attention, the need for connection, the need for healthy nutrition, the need for security, the need for affection, need for encouragement, information, as well as the need for processing and for autonomy, like I mentioned before, are very important needs. So if any of these needs go unmet, a type of passive stress builds up for the child, and therefore their behavior can be linked back to this cause. And as well, another cause for childhood stress is situational stress. Now, situational stress is stress that is nobody's fault. Okay, these are caused by life changes. For example, if there's moving their homes or changing school, can be quite stressful for everyone involved, especially children. Divorce or separation, death of a family member or even a pet, illness, accidents, different types of these things can be stressful. They're just normal things that happen in our life, and they're caused by the overall situation. Because life isn't a walk in the park, as we all know, right? As parents, we feel the burden and the pressure more than anybody because we have to care for these children and make sure that all of their needs are met as well as our own needs, and try to do our best in a world where we have so much stress and pressure and overstimulation that we're bombarded with through the modern world and media technology, which is in front of us all in today's age. So there's a lot of situational stress and a lot of pressure from all angles, just in life in general. And we have to be empathetic to the fact that children, their senses are a lot more sensitive than ours as adults, because we've had so many years in order to kind of develop different filters and stuff like that to block out different types of stimulations and to deal with the circumstances and pressures that life demands of us. But oftentimes children don't have those filters, and they can be much more sensitive than we are. And again, because they're entirely dependent on adults, they are really powerless in this world. And as such, it can be hard sometimes for children to keep up to a world which is geared mostly to adults. And for the most part, the world in which we live in is not very child-friendly. There's lots of violence, inappropriate information and stimulation, and visuals that we see on TV and in modern media. And the world itself, there's a lot of unsafe areas where children can get hurt if they're not careful. And so we live in a world where it's catered to adults, and children have to kind of try to keep up with the pace of adults. So, but this can be quite stressful for kids because, quite frankly, it's stressful for us as adults. So imagine how difficult or stressful it can be for your children too at times. The plus side of this is that children are incredibly adaptable and buoyant, and they can bounce back very quickly. And and I'll talk about how we can help them do that in the next section when we talk about helping children process this stress and the causes for this stress, okay? But it's important for us to understand the causes in order to help our children both process them and to help prevent unnecessary excess of stress. Now, the fourth cause of childhood stress is birth trauma. Okay, these are types of trauma that happen during pregnancy, during birth, and postpartum. And so these can happen due to prolonged labor or other types of traumas that happen. Now, oftentimes with babies who might not sleep during the night and might wake up and seem overly tense, the birth trauma can be a cause. And oftentimes just by looking at the history of the birth and pregnancy, we can determine and deduce whether or not this is the cause. But for the most part, when we're talking about bedtime issues and defiance and other things that come up at night, typically it's the three other types of stress which are at play: the aggressive type stress, the passive stress, and the situational stress. So how can we help our children heal from this stress that we can't avoid? Well, the key is in processing the tension and the pressure behind the hurt, okay? So there's 8 ways to process childhood stress. And this I outline in my book, Democratic Parenting. The first way is in talking about our stress, okay? And we can see that this has developed into a lot of modern therapy techniques. And a lot of people, adults, and even children will be able to process some of their experience or the information simply by talking, okay? Because remember that the stress can be caused not only from feelings and emotions and hurts, whether they're aggressive or passive types hurts, but also by confusing information or an excess of information which they haven't been able to process, or sometimes situations and experiences which they don't understand, which can be confusing to them. And when children are confused and they don't understand what's going on around them, that makes them feel disconnected. And remember, disconnection from their environment will trigger an instinctual response around survival, because they feel that their survival may be threatened by not understanding all the nuances and everything in their environment. It can threaten their sense of security. So talking can be a way to help children process their stress. Now, again, it's the children that will do the talking. Now, some children and some adults process stress very well through talking. Others, they don't at all. So that's why it's important to understand all these different ways, because different children will process it in different ways. And they'll oftentimes, the wonderful thing about children is that because they're so close to innate instinct and intuition and our deep human nature, is that they will tend to move towards the way that helps them process the stress naturally. Another way to describe these 8 different ways to process stress are inborn repair kits for healing from stress, okay? Because they're all natural human ways to process tension. The next one is laughing. Laughter is often called the best medicine, and it's called the shortest distance between 2 people. So especially when there's any type of tension around a situation or an issue, or a sense where the connection, the need for connection is unmet, allowing a circumstance to allow natural giggles to come out can be incredibly healing, not only to bridge that connection, but also to dissolve any tension that might be around any specific issue. If a child has anxieties about something, and if you can create a circumstance to get them laughing about it, to feel empowered beyond the problem that they're perceiving, and to feel more powerful, so the problem becomes like a joke rather than something overwhelming, then you've just dissolved all the tension around it, and it won't hold the same grip on the child as before. Symbolic play. Play therapy is a wonderful way for children to process stress and tension. And actually, it's through play that children really learn the best. And children will naturally tend towards symbolic play if you allow them the opportunity to do so. And there's a great method that's outlined in the book Democratic Parenting called self-directed play. And this is basically where you set up the circumstances and environment and set apart the time and remove the distractions and the overstimulation in a play area or in an environment to allow the child to enter into the self-directed play where they are just directing their own play. And what will happen is that they will start to naturally come into this symbolic play and process a lot of feelings or experience or information just by moving and playing. And we can often see children who do this when they will imitate things that they see, like sometimes children with dolls or figures, they might imitate characters that they might have seen on TV or in videos and reenact different things they saw in movies. Or sometimes they will play with characters as if they're teachers or their parents or other people in their lives. And these are ways that they process different things through this type of symbolic play. The next way that children heal from stress is through sweating. And this is a wonderful way that we all heal from stress and detoxify ourselves, because another major cause of physical stress is pollution, different types of toxins and allergens that can pollute the body. And this we see very common today with because of so much processed and genetically modified foods that are oftentimes injected with different additives and preservatives that can be quite toxic to children. And oftentimes the commercial food that is marketed directly to children, like we see with the sugar cereals, are really filled with these types of chemical pollutants that bog down the child's natural immunity and even and can be toxic to their cells. At the same time, they don't get the nutrition they need. So this lack of nutrition becomes a type of passive stress because it's not meeting a child's need for healthy nutrition. So by sweating is a way to release a lot of the toxic accumulation that may come from external pollutants, or it may come from internal stress, the stress hormones that can happen during the fight or flight response due to the amygdala hijacking, which causes stress hormones to get released. And these stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline are actually toxic to our overall system. So it's important that we help our children process these. And sweating is a great way to do that. And just letting the child run around and play or do different sports and activities is a way to do this. And, as adults, when you exercise and get a really good sweat, you feel so much better afterwards, as long as you hydrate. If you don't hydrate properly, you might feel really terrible afterwards. So it's important to take all these things together and live a balanced life, and to approach all these different ways to live a healthy lifestyle in a balanced way. Okay, another way to heal from stress is through muscle release or tissue release. And what we know is that oftentimes people will hold tension and pressure in their bodies through holding muscles and tissues. And this can develop into stress headaches or tummy aches or headaches that we see with children, or other issues. We can see the postural misalignment can start to happen. And, that's why massage therapy and these other, acupuncture and craniosacral therapy and other types of body work and touch therapy, or even stretching and even exercise, can be great ways to heal from stress and to release this tension from these tissues. Because even in exercise, through just using these muscles, a lot of the release will happen right in the muscles and tissues in themselves as well. That's another way that we heal from stress naturally. The sixth way is through sleeping and resting, right? Sleep is such an important and integral part to our life. We spend so much time sleeping, and that's an important time where all of our blood and our internal body resources come out of our muscles and our external nervous system and come deep inside our body into the internal organs and nourish our internal organs while they sleep and repair different damage, release tension and stress, and everything internal happens during sleep. So sleep is an important and integral and vital part to our overall health and longevity by getting good sleep. And these habits are best developed in childhood, these good sleeping habits. But what can happen easily because of stresses and other unmet needs is that children can have a hard time falling asleep and they don't get the sleep they need. And this can develop, again, into a type of passive stress like I mentioned before. But sleeping is a wonderful way just to heal from stress, and that's what this webinar is about, is to help children sleep better so they can rejuvenate better. Crying. Crying is probably one of the most powerful and effective ways to help children heal and process tension and stress. And I say that because children so commonly will naturally tend towards having a big cry by themselves. Unfortunately, most societies today frown upon crying, and the parents are too quick to rush their children to composure or to hush them. And then what happens is they stop the child from having a full release by suppressing their crying. Soothers and pacifiers that are given to babies and children are a way that these feelings are often suppressed. And we can see that simply by the name, a pacifier or a soother, trying to soothe the feelings and the upset. But instead of soothing and repressing them, we want to help our child release them, because after they have a big cry, they will feel way better. And most adults know this themselves. How many times have you experienced feeling really good and refreshed after having a good cry about something? Okay, and children feel the same way. And we're going to talk more about this specific way to process childhood stress, simply because tears so commonly come up at the bedtime transition. Children will often have meltdowns or will wake up crying. And that's the reason this happens, is because of the transition from wakefulness to sleep. That's when the control lets go, when the body starts to release and go to sleep. The child has to let go of control and the release will happen. And also we move from the conscious realm into the subconscious, and it's within the subconscious where all the feelings and emotion lies. And if there's any unresolved feelings or hurts that have been suppressed through a day of overstimulation, or sometimes if a child starts to have a tantrum in the grocery store, for example, it's not appropriate time, we might move them out of there and distract them from having a tantrum. But at nighttime, those feelings will still be there because the tantrum wasn't allowed to process, to fulfill the processing to completion. So these feelings can reappear at nighttime when finally they have a chance to just relax and release. So we're going to talk specifically about that more in this webinar, is how to help our child cry in a healing way, to process these feelings and to move beyond the difficulty in the transition around bedtime. And eventually, if a child is overwhelmed by stress and tension, if we can help them process this by crying out these feelings and draining them to completion through tears, eventually we'll get to a point where they will go to sleep easily and harmoniously and gracefully without needing to have a big cry. But again, we have to be aware that life isn't always a field full of flowers, and stress and pressures reappear in our lives. So we have to be prepared to be there again for our child, to listen to them process these feelings and maybe have a good cry to release the tension if they need to, even after we might have overcome the problem that we're facing right now in the future, for example. Okay. And the eighth way to process childhood stress is through getting sick, okay, by having colds or, these symptoms of cold and flu are often ways that the body will release toxicity and toxic buildup and allow the body just to rest and relax and catch up on its rest and relaxation. Okay, this is not always the case, and it's important if we're unsure that our child is having these symptoms of sometimes fever or chills or they might have a lot of nasal mucus that might come up, or sweating. This is sometimes caused by childhood stress and the buildup of stress, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's a real medical issue. So we need to be careful and do our due diligence and seek medical attention when necessary if our child is getting sick. But I just mentioned it here because many parents don't realize that oftentimes children will show these symptoms just when they're processing maybe a big life change or a stressful experience. And even adults will often go through this as well. How many times have you worked so hard and gone through all these challenges in your life and all this pressure and stress to try to get to a vacation that came up, and you got sick the day after you went on vacation. And this will often happen because the body finally relaxes, and then it starts to heal itself, and all the toxins will start to come out of the body through these types of symptoms of cold and fever. But again, we need to be careful, do our due diligence, and make sure our children are well taken care of. Okay, so these are the 8 ways to process childhood stress, and there's more detail on this in my book, Democratic Parenting. You see, bedtime is the perfect opportunity to help our child process stress that they've accumulated throughout the day. Now, why is this? Well, because I mentioned before, bedtime is the transition between external attention and internal reflection, from active consciousness to passive unconsciousness. And it's when it's in the unconscious where the feelings and the emotions lie. And it's at this point that we release the stress, release the control, and allow ourselves to melt into our beds and fall asleep into the unconscious. So this transition, if a child is repressing and holding their tension, their stress throughout the day, and they haven't had a chance to process everything, it's going to come up at night. Children that have not processed during the day, you see, it's a natural instinct of ours and our bodies to have the most restful and rejuvenating sleep possible. It makes sense, doesn't it? Because if we have a very rejuvenating and restful sleep, then we're going to wake up stronger, better able to survive in the day. So it's our natural instinct to have a rejuvenating, really good sleep. But if we go to bed and we're tense, then the rejuvenating qualities of sleep are interrupted. Bedtimes become difficult for parents when they're tired and they're not prepared to help their children process strong feelings and emotions. So let's talk about getting prepared. Okay, let's get prepared. So as I mentioned before, oftentimes if a child hasn't processed tension or stress during the day, at nighttime, during the bedtime transition, it'll come up because it represents the perfect opportunity for them to process that. And if we can be there for our children and take advantage of this opportunity, we can help them get a better sleep, make the transition easier, and cutting down on our own stress at nighttime and by trying to get our children to bed and knowing that they're staying up, and giving our children the healthiest childhood possible by making sure they get enough rejuvenating sleep. Okay, so the way to do this, oftentimes what we have to do is first invest some time into the routine before bed. Okay, so first off, there's 3 components to graceful bedtimes. The first one is the routine and rhythm before bed. Next is helping kids process stress and feelings, and the transition from wakefulness to sleep. So let's talk about routine and rhythm before bed. Most children today live very active and high stimulation lives and require hours to settle down into a good sleep. You see, everything comes into balance, activity and passivity. yin and yang. And today, our lives are so filled with overstimulation because of hectic schedules and technology and the media that's everywhere, and just so much information that especially our school-age children are required to process at school every day, that we have to expect that it's going to take some time for our children to settle down so they can get a good sleep, to settle down from these overstimulating days. As such, we want to try and aim for our children to get 10 to 12 hours of sleep a night. Now, for many parents, this sounds like a lot. That's why I say aim, because we might not always achieve that. Sometimes on the weekend, we can get to more of a 12-hour sleep if our children don't have to get up early. And oftentimes, they will sleep as long as they need to, okay, if we let them. But during the week, usually we have to get our children up earlier than they would naturally because we have to get them to school and get ourselves to work, okay? So the key is to get our children to bed earlier so they can get enough sleep, okay? So try to aim for at least 10 hours during the weekdays, okay? So then what we want to do is find the hour that we want to put our child to bed, the bedtime, because we know what time we have to wake them in order to get out the door on time for school. So then calculate backwards to 10 hours and aim for that time to be your bedtime. If you can't possibly do 10 hours because of your schedule, then go whatever longest sleep time you can do. If it's 9 hours or 8 hours, fine. But we want to get away from the short sleeps that a lot of children end up falling into because of unhealthy patterns and control patterns and the excessive stress and stimulation that can keep them up later at night. Or if they wake up at night multiple times, especially with young babies or toddlers, they can often wake up at night and not get the sleep that they require. So begin winding down 2 to 3 hours before the bedtime, okay? So the bedtime is the time that you determine you want your child to fall asleep. And then schedule backwards from that time, 2 to 3 hours, and start winding down at that point. So what I mean here is start just creating a more understimulating, a more relaxing environment. Oftentimes for parents, this will take them right from dinner time, from the time when they sit down for dinner or even coming up to dinner, and then that whole period from even before dinner time or during dinner time right up into bed. You want to approach that in a less stimulating time, a more relaxing time, okay? So begin winding down. Remember that active stimulation in the evening, like TV, video games, running around, or a lot of sugar with desserts, may prolong the amount of time they need to settle down because of the stimulating factors of this. It will require more processing on the child's side, okay? So just be aware of that if you're going to let your child watch TV or play video games or run around in high-intensity activity, it might get them going again, okay? Also, we need to pay attention to the amount of sugar children eat before bed too, because in some cases, it can wind children up. Not in all cases, but we need to be aware of all those factors. Also, we want to focus on meeting as many of our children's needs as possible in the final hours before going to bed. So this refers to meeting their needs for connection, affection, attention, information, or other types of needs that we might determine that they have. And that way, when they get ready for bed, then they can fall asleep with all their needs met, happy, and they won't have to start to act out or to resist or request all these demands because they feel that these underlying needs are not met. Okay, other important factors with your routine and rhythm before bed is to remember that the key to graceful transition is in connective communication. And I have a chapter of this in my book, Democratic Parenting. But connective communication is simply communicating with your child that maintains a strong connection or reaches through disconnection or improves connection between you and your child. Oftentimes, children need to be reminded that they're going to have to get ready for bed or that bedtime is approaching, because children, depending again upon their age, they might not have much of a time awareness. They might not know what time it is, and they might not even be able to process what 30 minutes is. If you tell them, okay, we're going to brush your teeth in 30 minutes, or you have 30 more minutes to do such and such, before you need to put on your pajamas before bed, really young children won't be able to process what 30 minutes actually means. That's why we have to stay in constant communication. So just by letting them know that bedtime is coming up, that's going to help prepare them. And that's really important in meeting our children's need for predictability and for information and for connection, because that way they feel connected to the overall routine and rhythm of bedtime and nighttime. And by setting up these different routines and rhythm before bed, and by having these connected communication, by communicating to them certain pivotal points in their routine, like getting into their pajamas, brushing their teeth, perhaps having a bath, or making their bed, or whatever it is you decide to put into your routine and rhythm before bedtime. When you communicate these, that creates these types of anchors in your child's overall awareness to help trigger them into a more graceful transition. So the more that you can kind of set up a routine that is the same every night for a couple of hours leading up to bed, and you communicate the different points of those rhythms, after a while your child will know each of the different steps, and they'll start to put themselves to bed after you initiate the first the first aspect of their rhythm. And I refer to those as like anchors, because they're anchors. They ground them into the routine, into the rhythm, and get them into the process to get ready for bed and make the transition to bedtime more graceful. Oftentimes, a big upset for many children is that they didn't have time to transition bedtime, and they go from playing or being really interested and attentive to a movie or a video game really into some activity that they're doing, and all of a sudden their parent is getting angry at them or getting impatient for them to get ready for bed. And they, within their own frame of reference, from where they're coming from, didn't have time to make that transition because they weren't communicated to beforehand that this was happening. So they were just purely engaged into that, and they weren't given enough time. That's why they might start to ignore parents, or prolong the bedtime, or resist the bedtime. How I've heard so many times where parents struggle because their child's watching TV and they're telling them to get ready for bed, and they keep ignoring them, and they can't understand why their child isn't listening to them. It's because they didn't develop a proper routine, and also they haven't learned how to set up kind limits, to set a strong limit there so the child cannot ignore the parent. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about limit setting shortly. Also, we want to start to develop the kind of bedtime ritual routine that will nourish your needs, the parent's needs, as well as your child's needs. Okay, so when you develop your overall routine and rhythm before bed, take into consideration your own needs as well. Okay, because it has to be an enjoyable experience for you too during this time. So you might take some time for yourself leading up to bed, just to have some time alone, or to kind of ground yourself, especially if you know that you're going to have to deal with a healing limit and help your child process some strong feelings before bed. You want to make sure that your emotional cup is filled, so you'll have the patience and the reserve, the emotional reserve, to really be there and listen to your child's strong feelings. Because remember, strong feelings in our children often bring up strong feelings in ourselves. That's why so many parents get frustrated and impatient and get triggered when our child starts to exhibit and express strong emotions and feelings. Okay, so it's important to meet our own needs as well. Now, during the weekdays, decide on what time you want your child to be sleeping, and again, work backwards from the bedtime routine and plan about 2 to 3 hours backwards. Now, here's a 90-minute formula to wind down before bed. Okay, you can use this as kind of a template. You don't have to do exactly 90 minutes, and you don't have to follow this exact formula, but just to give you an idea of how to kind of create a routine and a rhythm before bed that helps meet your child's needs as well as your own, and guides them into the process, gives them enough time to really prepare. Okay, so first, devote the last 30 minutes before sleep for connecting with your child. Okay, this might be reading a book in bed, or talking quietly in bed, or snuggling with them, maybe even laughing and giggling. Just want to make sure that it's not overly stimulating, because if it's too stimulating, it can trigger your child might just get them going and wind them up again. So whatever we do during this time, We just want to make sure that our mood also is very relaxed and very calm, very peaceful, because we want to model this type of relaxation for our children. If we're tense and wound up ourselves before bed, then our children are modeling that behavior and they're feeling that energy from us. So how can we possibly expect them to wind down if we can't wind down ourselves? Okay, what we have to do then is find some way to calm ourselves down and create a transition so our child can relax and perhaps they're not affected so much by our own stress as well. But so by scheduling this type of time before bed and really devoting the last 30 minutes to just being with your child and relaxing with them, it can kind of create a framework for you as the parent to relax as well, so that you can really be there with them and spend that time. And that will meet many of their needs, their deeper, most important needs for attention and connection and affection, which are things that all children need from their parents. Okay, then 15 minutes before that, 15 minutes before you schedule the time to settle down and connect with your child in bed, you can do 15 minutes or however much time you need, depending upon what your total routine is. But that's the getting ready for bed routine, okay? And that's where your child is brushing their teeth, washing their face and hands, getting pajamas on. If they take really short baths, maybe they take a short bath. I say short because we're scheduling just a little bit of time here for the overall getting ready for bed things, okay? But some children, when they get in the bathtub, that's a time where they play and they process a lot of their experience, and that's a really great thing for them to do too. It becomes a type of symbolic play, a bath time. So, if that's the case, then you want to devote some time before that. I recommend 45 minutes before the getting ready for bed routine, at least 45 minutes, maybe even more, depending upon what you're able to do in your life and your overall schedule. And you want to devote that time for self-directed play. Okay, and that might be within taking a bath or playing with their toys or drawing or reading, or any type of thing where they can just process their own experience and any types of feelings or anything that they need to process through type of symbolic play activities, through doing this self-directed play. Okay, again, in my book, Democratic Parenting, there's an entire chapter on self-directed play. So you can read that book to get more detail on how to set that up. But really what it is just letting your child play by themselves in a safe and relaxing environment that is not overstimulating, so that they can start to use their own imagination and use themselves and use different manipulatives or toys in their environment to process whatever they need to process. So you want to avoid stimulating things like TV and video games or anything like that. This is really something where they engage their body and they move around, they manipulate things themselves rather than being entertained and being in a passive state. Okay, so now if a child tends to get hyperactive during this time, this type of self-directed play, which can happen with many children, we want to then guide them towards a more calm and relaxed transition. So we might, change the type of environment we do the self-directed play. Perhaps we might reduce some of the stimulating toys that might cause them to get wound up. Especially with boys, if they have types of figures that are more violent and aggressive and based around war and fighting. Figures that have weapons like swords. Like could be different characters or Legos and these types of things, which are oftentimes have characters which have quite aggressive and violent and agitated faces, and as well as weapons. Then they can start to get involved in this more agitative type of play where it's more aggressive. So we might remove those toys and set up just during this time to do something more calm, less stimulating, maybe art or using some types of toys that are more dynamic and not so static in the violent aspect that often we see with toys for boys. Okay, now how can we help? So that's different ways that we can set up the routine at bedtime to make it more graceful and to help them wind down. This is kind of a formula to set up the time before bed to help them wind down. Now, how can we help our children process feelings at bedtime? Because sometimes we can do this great routine and set them all up, but still when the time comes after we spend that 30 minutes of connection with our child, and we try to disengage and close the door or turn off the light of their bedroom, big feelings might come up, and then they might have a meltdown. They might be extra needy. And this is very, very common if children, if stress is a factor, because they're going to just love the attention they get at that 30-minute connection time. And if their need for connection is not fully met, or other feelings might be at play, then when you try to disengage at that point, really strong feelings might come up. There might be a meltdown or tantrums, crying, different anxieties, night phobias, or demands like they want to go to the bathroom, or, they're hungry, or they're thirsty, or they need the light on, or they want you to come check on them. All these types of different things. If these come up for your child, then you will know that these come up. And as such, what you then want to do is schedule an extra hour before bed between the transition time between the getting ready for bedtime and the falling asleep. And you want to schedule this extra hour to help them process these strong feelings. So we do this by establishing a healing limit. Okay, this is when we're going to talk about how to set these limits at bedtime. Now, these can happen right at the transition at bedtime, or perhaps before, if our child is ignoring us because they're doing something else. They're maybe really involved. They really love that self-directed play, but it's really time for them to stop and get ready for bed, but they're really ignoring you and resisting you. Then you have to step in and set a limit so that you can stop the pattern of ignoring you right away. The biggest mistake that many parents make when their children don't listen to them is that they just repeat themselves, and they keep the pattern. They ingrain the pattern deeper. Sometimes they'll start to yell and freak out and get really angry with their child. But the problem with losing your temper and getting angry with your child is that the potency of your anger as the parent really becomes diminished the more you become angry with them, because it becomes traumatic for a lot of children to see their parent upset and angry, because the last thing that children really want to do on a deep level is to upset their parents. All children deeply want our approval and our acceptance and our encouragement and connection with us. So when we get upset with children, although sometimes that's the only way to actually get them to do something, because children are often caught in a pattern of defiance and ignoring us because of tension. But if we play into that, then and we keep the pattern going, and we keep getting upset and have to up the ante with punishments and threats and these types of things, then it just makes the issue worse. What we want to do is dissolve the tensions and reverse that pattern. Okay, the way to do this is to set firm but kind limits. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit more. So let's first talk about just setting a general limit. Okay, when a child is ignoring us or that type of thing, what we want to do is to step in to establish a limit. But the way to do this in a loving way, in a way where children become more responsive, and we can kind of break through the disconnect and the feelings and the problem, is to use the technique of connective communication, which I mentioned before. So we set the limit using connective communication. In connective communication, we use our tone of voice, the words we use, and our body language. And we want to convey a deep desire to connect with them. We want to convey our deep love and our care and our compassion and our empathy for them. We want to really reach through into their hearts and beyond all the superficial behaviors that are at play to connect with their hearts. And the way we do that is we can, if our child is watching TV and we've asked them once or twice or 3 times, and we feel that our child is just ignoring us and they're not respecting us, then we can step in at that point. We can turn off the TV itself. And our child might jump up and be really upset and react. And at that point, we establish a healing limit. So we want to make eye contact. We might kneel down. We might make body contact, gentle hand contact, put our hand on their shoulder, or touch them in a gentle kind of way, a reassuring way, to let them know that we love them, that we want to connect them, we want to really understand their deeper feelings. But the firm aspect of these limits is that we're not going to let them ignore us, and we're not going to let them ignore our request and to deny what's really going on. Because again, we want children, we want to set the example for respect and trust in the home environment. And we want our children to trust that if they express something important to us, that we're there to listen to them. And the way to do that is to model the behavior. And so therefore, it's important that if we express something to our children that is important to us, that they listen to us as well, okay? And therefore, getting ready for bed and following our instructions to make a graceful transition so that they get a good night's sleep and that they wake up early and that everyone can get out the door in time without being late is meeting everyone's needs. So our children need to kind of follow our lead in this. And therefore, what we want to do is to set that healing limit to demonstrate to them that we love them, that we understand that sometimes the transition for bed might be hard. We understand that they may have really been enjoying the activity that they're engaged in. You know, maybe they were watching TV, and we can understand and empathize that they enjoy that and they're disappointed that they weren't able to watch the full program or to finish whatever activity that they're really enjoying. But at the same time, we reaffirm the importance of sticking with routine and of listening to us and cooperating with the overall schedule of the entire family, okay? And this goes a long way in teaching our children to be aware of the needs of everyone in the family, to develop a more unified and connective atmosphere in the family, and it really nourishes children on a deeper level to feel connected. Because the other way to go is where children start to get really selfish and become self-centered and entitled and bratty because they feel the world revolves around them, because they're able to manipulate the adults around them and eventually get what they want, you know, by postponing bedtime and making their parents react and trigger the reactions in their parents. And that can develop a really negative and unhealthy and self-centered patterns and really impede on the well-being of everybody, and it can be incredibly stressful and irritating for the parents. Okay, so this is a great way to help our children come back within to feel reconnected to the overall family culture and the overall family routine by setting these firm limits with our child. But at the same time, we're using connective communication so we don't deviate from the love that we want to try and communicate with our child. So at no point do we want to get upset with our child, yet we can stay firm and we can show in our eye contact and our tone of voice that we're not deviating, we're not going to give in to their demands, we're not negotiating. Big mistake parents make is that they negotiate with their children, or they say no a few times to their child, but then they change their mind. Okay, if the child says, well, I'm hungry, you know, I want a snack before bed, and we know that they just ate and had a big meal and that their needs for nutrition is fully met. So we know it's just an avoidance tactic or a tactic to prolong the bedtime. And but you know, that's a tough one for parents, because deep down inside all parents, I think there's deep-seated fear that our children are going to starve, or we're not feeding or nourishing our children. So the food aspect, the hunger aspect really triggers parents a lot, and it's easy for us to give in. At first we might say no because we can feel and we intuit at first that maybe it's just a control pattern, but if the child repeats it, and sometimes they can do so in such a convincing and whining and concerning way, that we might give into these things. But again, what we're doing at that point is we're demonstrating a lack of respect for the limits we're setting. Because if we don't stand firm in our limits, we're communicating with our child that we even don't respect what we're saying and the limits that we're setting. So why would our children do that? And we're also reinforcing to our child that these limits can be overcome with enough whining and with enough repetition, you know, and whatever it is that whatever manipulation tactics they're using in order to try and get their way. So, you know, an extreme balance is required here. You know, that's why it's so important to really understand the deeper underlying root causes of why our child might be behaving different ways, so that we can know how to respond in these cases. Because we have to be careful that oftentimes children might be expressing a real need, that they are thirsty or that they are hungry. And the wisest thing for us is to let them have a snack or drink before bed, so that we can meet all their needs. Because we might be barking up the wrong tree if we're if we're responding to their behavior or jumping to assumptions without really figuring out what the underlying root cause of their behaviors are. And that's why in democratic parenting, the very first step that we want to do when we're approaching difficult behavior patterns is to figure out the underlying root cause of the issue. So next is we might find ourselves setting a healing limit with our child, and that is when at nighttime they have a meltdown and a big cry starts to come up. We know that stress is a major factor at play, and at nighttime they start to exhibit that, and they're starting to cry or start to throw a fit, and we feel that we can hear the desperation in their voice, and they're making demands, and we're setting a limit with that, and we know that they're going to have a big tantrum, a big cry. Okay, we call that a healing limit, and it's a wonderful thing because it's allowing our children to resolve all this tension and stress, which is overwhelming their whole bodies, their body, their mind, their emotions, everything. So by allowing them to heal from this, they're going to be able to reapproach their challenges and their lives and their relationships and with a much clearer awareness. And it reduces toxicity in the body as well, so it's very good for health to set these limits when necessary. So there's 4 stages in setting a healing limit. This again is responding specifically to meltdowns and crying and tantrums, fits, these types of things. The first thing is we have to establish the child's safety. Sometimes when children have big tantrums, they may flail around, or they might get violent and aggressive with you or with their siblings. So we want to make sure that everyone, including yourself and the child, are safe. Okay, so we might have to step in and avoid a child from hurting their head if they're flailing around, or from hurting someone else if they act out in angry or violent ways. Next, we want to focus loving attention on connecting with the child. Okay, and that's going to be our overall focus when doing this healing limit. We focus, we concentrate our attention on connecting with our child's heart. Okay, so we want to reach through the disconnect that our child may have with us or with whatever's going on, and really focus on connecting with them. And we do that through our eye contact, through our body language, through the tone of our voice, and through our presence. Okay, just by being there and by letting the child know that we're there when they might be having a huge meltdown goes a long way to help them feel connected, and therefore that connection helps them feel more safe and secure to have a better and a bigger release, to really just let it go, because they feel this type of emotional cocoon that we can allow for them to really just heal fully. And that will result in a better processing of the feelings and tensions. Okay, next is we want to listen to those strong feelings. Okay, that's what I was just talking about. Listen to those strong feelings as they come. And this can happen for quite some time, and it can be difficult for parents. We're going to talk shortly on how to make this easier for parents to listen to the strong feelings, because strong feelings in other people trigger strong feelings in ourselves that haven't been processed. And especially as parents, the last thing we like to hear oftentimes is the sound of our own child crying. Because just as much as for children to instinctually respond to a sense of disconnect with tears and emotion and this type of fight or flight response, for parents, we respond to the sound of our child's tears in the same way, which is an instinctual response to care for a child who might be in need, because they communicate, our babies especially communicate their needs through tears. And so as such, we parents become hyper alert to our children's tears and feelings. We want to respond to those and soothe our child. But we have to remember that sometimes the best way we can help our child meet their needs is by listening to the strong feelings and not rushing them to composure, not trying to soothe their feelings, not trying to pacify them, but just let them cry it out, to allow them to trust in their own bodily intelligence to release those strong feelings and to drain them to completion. Okay, so we want to listen to these strong feelings, and this can, oftentimes children can cry for over an hour, and the more that we can really be present for them during this whole time, the better and the more complete this healing will be. It's important to remember that all feelings have a beginning and an end. So it might seem like a lot while you're listening to your child's feelings, and your feelings might be getting triggered as well. but just keep breathing and remember that all feelings have a beginning and an end. So we want to try and listen to them until they fully drain. Okay, and then we just want to repeat this process to as much as necessary, because we might set a healing limit one night, and usually if we do right before bed, if this comes up in a child's meltdown, we listen to their strong feelings. We schedule time beforehand. We listen to them when we let our child know, and they cry and cry. Typically, what happens, they'll end up crying themselves to sleep. But what happens is that stress can happen, it can come up the next day. Another situation might happen. They might build up more stress that needs to be healed and processed. And maybe nighttime becomes the most ideal time at another date. So we want to repeat this process again. Or if there's a lot of attention accumulation, or if the pattern around bedtime and the control patterns around bedtime are deeply ingrained, it may take several healing limit sessions at bedtime to allow until the child has fully let it go and fully released it, and will be able to transition gracefully into bed. And after you spend that 30 minutes with them of just connecting and cozying with them, at some point you'll be able to just say, "Good night, sweetheart," and kiss them on the cheek, and they'll kiss you back and say, "Good night, mommy or daddy," and you can turn the light off, and they will go to bed themselves. And that does happen. I know this from experience, because from my own experience with my child, he's lived through different stresses like all children, and there were times when he required to have these healing limits that would come up at nighttime. And there was a time when the transition to his own room, because when he was young, he slept in the same room with us. When he went to his own room, there was a big transition period there where he resisted it and wanted to sleep in our room. And but by working through it, at this point, he's able to go to sleep by himself, and it's a very graceful sleep. So I can tell you from my own experience, and also working with other parents from around the world, that this really does work. You just have to be patient and see it through. So how do we do it, though? How do we do it if we feel stressed and tired and pressured ourselves? Well, here's some tips to prepare yourself for the bedtime healing limits. Okay, first, you want to find some time during the day to fill your own emotional cup, so that you can be more patient, so you can be present for your child, so that you can listen to them cry and have a big release for an hour. Okay, it takes patience, presence, and self-restraint in order to be there and to not lose our temper or our patience, and to really be present, to listen to all those tears come out. So we need to find time during the day and do whatever we need to do to fill your own emotional cup. I call this me time. So these are things that you can do that heal your own pressure and resolve and process your own stress and tension that you have, so that you can be more present yourself. Okay? Practicing patience is really how we become more patient. So remember that this is a practice. It's not going to happen one time that you do the bedtime healing limit and then everything will be graceful from there on out. Okay? You have to practice patience. And then the more you practice patience with your child, to listen to them through these healing limits, the more patient you will become, the less you will be triggered. So practice it, and you will see for yourself that it's true what I'm saying. And remember also that every tear heals, okay? And again, like I said before several times, that strong feelings in our children will trigger unresolved feelings or hurts within ourselves. And so it can be incredibly difficult to listen to our child cry. But if we remember that every tear heals, and that our children, and we know that these tears are actually healing tears, and they're not tears that are being expressed because of some other need that we're ignoring, we want to remember that every tear does heal. But again, it's worth mentioning at this point to really be aware and conscious that that's what our children need. Because if they're crying because they actually need something else, but we're just listening to them cry, it can actually enhance the stress, because of the pressure of the unmet need will enhance the passive stress, and they'll just feel that we're not meeting their needs even more. So even though they're crying and having a big fit, their needs still aren't being met. So again, it's a two-sided coin. On one side, we want to meet their needs and the underlying reasons for the tension and stress and pressure, and we also want to allow them the opportunity to heal and process this stress. Stay connected with your child during the tears. This is really important. I don't believe in letting our child cry by themselves. Instead, we want to stay present. We want to stay connected. We want to follow those 4 steps of setting a healing limit. where our attention is focused on them and we're reaching through their disconnect through the whole time. So we might, if our child is having a big cry at bedtime and we've started to move out of the room, they're in their bed and they say, no, mommy, don't leave. No, no, please don't leave. And they start to cry and cry and cry. Then what we can let them know is that we're not leaving them, that we're not disconnecting them because they're expressing a fear of that. They're expressing that they need that through their words, right? And through the desperation. So we let them know that we're there with them, but it's time for bed and that we're making our way out the door. So they might say, it's time for bed. I'm right here with you, but it's time for bed. It's time for you to close your eyes and fall asleep. I'm right here. I'm listening to you, but it's time for bed. And soon I'm going to go downstairs and you're going to fall asleep. And as you say those words, what you're doing is you're identifying and you're enhancing some of the tension that they have around the experience, that you're going to go downstairs and that they're going to fall asleep. By mentioning that, by saying that, a lot of feelings will probably just start to tumble forth with your child. They'll say, cry. They say, no, stay, mommy, no. And they'll cry and cry and cry. And then, but you let them know, you say, well, I'm right here, sweetie. I'm still right here. I'm not going. I'm right here. I'm listening to you. I understand that you're upset. And so every now and again, you want to reach into their heart and use words to let them know that you're still there, that you're still connected, that you're still listening, that they're not alone. But at the same time, you're not giving in to their demands, okay? And that's where the limit, that's the limit that you're setting. You're beginning to extract yourself, okay? You're creating that limit, that boundary, but you're maintaining the connection. And this technique is so powerful because it allows them to really tap into the underlying tension and to release that through their tears by at the same time meeting their needs. So, at that point in time, all their needs are met, and there's nothing wrong. They're not being disconnected. So it's pure feeling, irrational feelings that can get released and that they can let go. And they feel safe in letting that go because they're no longer justified. The feelings of being alone or the hurts of feeling disconnected from you during the day or disconnected from something else during the day. They're no longer relevant and in the moment because you're there with them, because that connection need is being met, that you're there. But it's important to note that if you use your words at this point, this kind of connected communication while you're setting the healing limit, you want to make sure that you don't talk too much, that you don't want to use your words to the point where you take them into the mental and out of their feelings. You want to keep them in the feelings. So use the words sparingly, and just listen to their tears. If they're crying and sobbing, just listen to them. But every now and then, maybe after, every 5 minutes or a few minutes after a big cry, you might let them know, say, I'm still here, I'm still listening to you, and that might initiate a more crying, right? You might feel that they're starting to kind of sob and doze off or something. And at that point, when they start to doze off and really relax, then, you can just let them fall asleep. And usually at that point, they'll have a really good sleep. And when they wake up, you'll probably see a difference in them. They'll be more present. They'll be more calm. They might show other signs that they have a more rejuvenating sleep. So try this, and remember, stay connected, and you'll see for yourself the incredible power of this technique. And remember, all feelings have a beginning and an end. The crying and the tantrums, the meltdown, the sobbing will come to an end eventually, and they'll doze off. Usually they'll fall right asleep, in mid-cry for children and crawlers and toddlers. Or sometimes it might take a while if it's caused by a big trauma, big life trauma. It might take days or weeks of doing this, and then eventually the feelings will end. So remember, breathe. When you're there, just breathe, relax, take in this time, realize that you're really helping your child heal, and listen to your child's heart. Tap into them. I think it's an incredible honor to be there with my own child or with other people that I help process these strong feelings by listening to them, have these types of emotional release, whether it's children or sometimes even with adults. I listen to them through the adult-to-adult listening time technique or other types of counseling methods. And I think it's an incredible honor to witness that type of vulnerability and release, and to be there to share that connection with the person and to support them while they just let all the unnecessary tension and pressure go. And oftentimes, because we're social creatures and because so many of us have been hurt through social interactions in our life, to have someone just give us that loving attention and just listen to us, not trying to make things better, not trying to give us advice, not trying to redirect us or to fix anything, but just to listen to our feelings. That shows the way of really demonstrating a deep respect for the legitimacy of our personal feelings. And truth be told is that whatever we feel, whether irrational or rational, logical, or purely emotional, whatever we feel, it's legitimate. And the same goes for our children. Whatever they feel is legitimate. And we have to understand that. So, just breathe and relax and listen to your child's heart and to their legitimate feelings. And this will go a long way in enhancing and creating such a strong and wonderful connection with your child. So next, let's talk about the transition between wakefulness and sleep. Okay, see, here's the thing, is that young and old children who have big cries and emotional releases at bedtime, they'll usually fall asleep while they're crying after they drain a lot of feelings. But sometimes children don't have strong feelings that they need to drain through tears. They might just have a hard time falling asleep because they're just so wound up, and they won't tend towards having to cry. They won't tend towards having a tantrum. And you'll be able to leave them there and they just won't go to sleep for hours. And they don't have this type of emotional or attachment issues that other children might demonstrate when you try and put them to bed. Some children might be awake at night. They might wake up at night and come into your room. Sometimes they wake up crying and they have nightmares and fears. Or crawlers and toddlers may wake up crying and needing comfort feedings to fall back asleep. So how can we help our children transition to a full night's sleep when they don't have strong feelings to drain? We need to re-examine then the underlying reason for the issue first, okay? Because with this, when we set the healing limit, we know that one of the major underlying reasons for their difficulty in falling asleep is that they have strong feelings, and or strong or stress that has accumulated. And so we allow an opportunity for them to process that through the healing limit. But what if that's not the issue? Well, we need to look at what the issue might be. And we have 3 reasons for all types of behaviors. And again, this is in my book, Democratic Parenting. It's the very foundation of democratic parenting to address the underlying root cause of the issue rather than reacting to the surface, superficial behavior itself, okay? So the first one is unmet needs. The second one is stress. The third one is modeling. Okay, we talked a lot about unmet needs and stress, and the modeling reason usually isn't a big factor when it comes to nighttime, except for when the parent themselves are wound up, or whether the home environment is incredibly stimulating at night. Sometimes because the environment is just overstimulating and active in the evening, the whole home, children might have a hard time relaxing and falling asleep because of that. But typically it's unmet needs and stress that are at play. So for us to understand this further, I want to go into a few examples of difficult problems around transitions to bedtime and sleep that we can face. I'm going to look at 3 separate case studies, and we can look at what the underlying reasons are to understand what's at play. So the first example is a 10-month-old baby who doesn't sleep more than 2 hours without waking up and crying. Now, the baby won't go to sleep unless the mother carries, feeds, rocks, and burps him to sleep. If she just tries to feed him in bed, he will keep crying until he's picked up, burped, and rocked. Okay? So this is a very common situation for parents and mothers of babies and crawlers and toddlers, where they wake up and don't sleep through the whole night. Okay? It's not always as severe as waking up every 2 hours, but this gives us a good example of what's going on. Now, when we ask further questions with this parent and learn a little bit more about the case, we discover soon that the diet of the mother might be affecting the child's digestion. Okay, that she's eating a lot of wheat and a lot of sugar and a lot of dairy, and perhaps some other types of food that are affecting the child's digestion. And As such, the child is waking up at night because they're irritated, and that's why they need to be burped and rocked to sleep. Okay, so here we can see that perhaps the issue is not a stress thing, but it might just be an accumulation of a type of passive stress, which is around their physiological well-being, nutrition, and the internal irritation that these things might be having on the digestive system. Now, I just gave the example of wheat and sugar as being the cause of the issue, but there's lots of different things that some babies are really sensitive to. And when nursing mothers might eat these types of things, it can really affect the baby's overall health. And as such, they might wake up and they might be irritated and they might want extra food. Now, here as well, what we can see is that not only is there an underlying need for healthy nutrition and for reduced allergens in their system, but also there has been the development of a control pattern where they need to be rocked to sleep, okay? And the fact that they need to be burped oftentimes is another factor here. So it's typically, after, 6 months of age, most babies should be able to sleep through most of the night unless they are tense or stressed or have other unmet needs that are causing them to wake up. But most babies, now it's not in all cases because all children and babies develop at different paces, but on average, it's the 6-month mark where children and babies should be able to sleep through the night. They're able to eat enough food, have enough nursing right before bed to carry them through to the morning before they wake up hungry. So the fact that they need to be fed every 2 hours is not necessarily the case that they might be hungry. And we can look at sometimes how much they're feeding to determine if they actually are hungry. Some babies will get in a pattern of just eating a little bit less or nursing a little bit less that will only carry them through a couple hours. Or sometimes, in this case, the issue might be that the mother is not producing enough milk, so she's only producing enough milk to feed the baby for 2 hours, and then they require more nutrition. So this might be an issue with the mother's physiological well-being and health that can be approached through a variety of different ways, like seeking help with their diet, seeking traditional Chinese medicine or natural styles of medicine to address their nursing and their milk production. Okay, so these are just examples of how we can look at different aspects of what's really going on here to determine the root cause of the issue. So here we can see that the reasons are passive stress. There could be a possible allergen in the mother's diet causing the abdominal discomfort of the baby. Okay, so the approach here, we want to address the underlying needs, and that's a democratic parenting approach. We want to reduce allergens in the mother's diet. Also, we want to allow the child to process the stress and break the control pattern through establishing a healing limit at night. Sometimes it's as simple as meeting the underlying need, reducing the allergen, and that's enough. But other times, these control patterns can get a little bit more ingrained. So even though the underlying need is being met, the control pattern has still established itself, and it's just a habit that gets into play. So we need to break that habit and that pattern by setting these types of healing limits. And then instead, what the mother might do if they're sure that the child is fed enough and that it just becomes comfort feeding to soothe the child, they don't actually need it. They will limit the nursing at night, maybe nurse less, or they might not rock the baby to sleep, or maybe just allow the burping to happen so the digestion works better. But after that point, instead of rocking them, they'll lie them down. And at that point, the baby might have a big cry because they're used to being rocked to sleep, and that's their control pattern. They want to be rocked and soothed like this. But we want to break that control pattern by just putting them down, and we remain connected with them. So all their needs are met. We know that everything's safe, and we just listen to them, and we can communicate with them, even though they're a small baby and they don't understand what we're saying, just by hearing our loving tone of voice, by using connected communication when they're having a big cry. We'll reaffirm to them that everything is well, and we're meeting their need for strong connection, and therefore they're able to process the control pattern more and release and let go of that control that's behind it, and then that will help to establish a new pattern of sleeping through the night. Okay, let's look at another example. In this example, we have a 7-year-old girl who needs to be read to for at least 1 hour every night before bed. Or she'll have a big fit if the parent tries to cut off the reading. We'll say at this point it's the father of a child, and anytime he tries to cut the reading short, she'll have a big temper tantrum or fit. And even sometimes when she is read to, she wants to have the light left on, have a night light, and to be checked on every 10 minutes, which can happen for an hour, sometimes more, before she finally falls asleep. She needs to be checked on every 10 minutes, and if she's not checked on after a while, she'll cry out for her dad. And sometimes she might stay awake for hours. And even though all these things, this reoccurs every night, still there's oftentimes meltdowns and big cries at bedtime. And so trying to figure out what's really at play here, in asking more about the child's situation, we found out that the parents are recently separated, and but even before the separation, this child had these control patterns at bed and with both parents. But then we find out that the child was affected by some of the conflict between parents. The child will often witness their parents fighting or hear them speak harshly to each other, and see the parents get upset and angry. And therefore, the stability and security and safety in the child's home and environment has been lacking for a couple of years up to this point. So we can see how the accumulation of passive stress can build. And even just, when sometimes two parents have big fights or conflicts around their children, the children pick up and feel and absorb and take on some of this aggressive energy. And therefore, it becomes a type of aggressive stress that the child can accumulate and that they will need to process. Okay, so here in this situation, we look at the underlying needs, and the reasons for this. One is that we have passive stress. Okay, so in asking more and finding more about the situation, we also find out that the child isn't getting much attention from their parents. Both parents are extremely busy. They lead very full lives and have a lot of pressure themselves, so they don't have much time to play with and give their child attention during the day. So we see that the unmet need is connection, attention. Also, as I mentioned, the need for security is missing as well because of seeing their parents sometimes get into fights. And also because the father and mother just recently moved into different houses because of the family breakup, there's this instability, okay? And this is the situational stress that the child is experiencing through the divorce. So they need to process a lot of tension around the family separation and the conflicts that they experienced, okay? Also, they need to have their needs for connection met. So that's how we approach it. That's how we respond using democratic parenting. By addressing the underlying needs, we meet their need for connection and attention by giving them extra play attention time. Play attention time is one of the most powerful techniques of democratic parenting. There's an entire chapter on it in my book. And basically what it is the same thing as self-directed play, except rather with self-directed play, we let them play by themselves. At this point, we will play with them. As parents, we give them our full attention and we play with them. And we also let the child lead the play. And this creates a very powerful technique to meet a variety of the child's really deep fundamental needs at the same time. So it's incredibly healing, incredibly powerful for parents. It's really just giving them this undivided, giving our children our undivided full attention for a specific period of time to really fill up their need for attention and connection with us. Okay, then we also want to allow our child to process the stress and break the control patterns around bedtime by setting a healing limit. Okay, we need to stop giving in to our child's demand for fear of a meltdown and a tantrum, and set up this healing limit and listen to that tantrum and meltdown. Because you see, fits and temper tantrums end up becoming a type of control pattern, and it's a type of almost a threat that our children can have upon us, as having a big threat and meltdown, a big meltdown and a fit or a temper tantrum. So if we can stop seeing it as a problem and realize that it's actually a wonderful way for our children to heal, and we can listen to that, then it no longer holds us captive to this type of the fear that our child's going to have of it. Therefore, we're prepared for it, we're ready for it, and we know how to deal with it and listen to it by following the 4 steps of setting a healing limit, then we can let our child just release all attention that's underneath the strong feelings, be underneath the meltdown, and therefore we can resolve the pattern entirely. Okay, so that's how we would approach this situation. We see that we got there is the cause of some accumulated stress here. Let's look at a third example. In this case, we have a 12-year-old boy who doesn't show any strong emotions or feelings, but usually can't fall asleep before 11 or 12 at night, even though all the lights have been out since 9 o'clock. Okay, so the child's lying awake at night for 2 to 3 hours, and then they struggle to get out of bed in the morning, and as a result, they're often late for school, and the parents get stressed and tense as well because they're late for work, and usually there's a big drama and upset in the morning, and the child is tired all morning long. Okay. Now, as we question further into this case, we found out that the boy is taking a stimulant drug for ADHD. They've been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As such, they're taking a stimulant drug, and this might be a reason why they're having a hard time falling asleep at night. Okay, but as such, they wake up incredibly tired. Okay, and bags are starting to show up in their eyes, and their behavior is showing up to be a little bit more and more disconnected. So here we see that the reasons is a type of situational stress, where the stimulant drug prescription, okay, for the diagnosis of ADD or ADHD. And there's also passive stress here, which is the nervous overstimulation caused by these stimulant drugs, because the stimulant drugs used for ADHD is the same thing as speed, which is sold on the streets and which are often abused by students or other people in the world, for entertainment or sometimes performance reasons. They will abuse this type of speed drugs, and it's the exact same drugs that are given to children and are classified as stimulant ADD or ADHD drugs. It's the same thing, so it really stimulates the nervous system, and as a result, their need for processing experience, stimulation, and information goes unmet, and this drug kind of just glosses over them and keeps them going. Okay, so we have 2 things happening here. So the response using democratic parenting is, again, to address the underlying needs. Okay, so first, we want to reassess the benefit-harm balance of using stimulant drugs on children. Okay, now that's exactly why I created the ADD, ADHD transformation program. This is a specific online program that I've created to help children overcome the symptoms of attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity without needing drugs. Okay, it's a 5-step process. Uses a lot of the democratic parenting principles in order to meet their underlying needs, to process some of the overwhelm that is causing the distraction, and to help them to refocus and enhance their concentration and attention. Okay, but so we want to reassess the benefit of taking these drugs. And again, another thing we can do is teach our children a simple meditation. Okay, and I promised I would teach a very simple meditation that all children can use to help them relax into their body more and to transition to sleep better. And it's a really simple method. Okay, I call it a meditation because they're going to be focusing on 3 different things. Okay, they want to focus on keeping their eyes closed. They focus on keeping their hands and their feet still, and on feeling their breathing. Okay, so we want to help our children just focus on this. And as we teach our children this, what we might do is just spend a little bit of extra time at night to kind of guide them through this for maybe 10 minutes or 15, 20 minutes, and just kind of repeat these things in a relaxing voice. We want to imagine like maybe we're almost like hypnotists as we talk to our child to remind them to focus on these 3 things, to teach them and guide them through this meditation. And after a while, as they learn it, they can start to do it themselves, and they will be able to relax more. So even if if their nervous system is overstimulated, their body can't relax because they're on these types of stimulant drugs, by teaching this meditation, they'll be able to relax more in their body, and therefore the physiological benefits of rest and relaxation will start to take effect even though they're not sleeping, and it will help them make this transition easier and fall asleep eventually into in bed. So again, we want to remind them, keep your eyes closed, keep your hands and feet still. And the importance of saying hands and feet rather than your whole body, it just gives them something specific to focus on, their hands and their feet, because oftentimes children who are overly agitated might be twitching at night. So keep their hands and feet still and feel your breathing. Listen to your breathing. Follow your breathing. You can tell them these different types of things to help them learn how to do this meditation. Okay, so these are some ways that we can respond to these underlying needs in these different cases. And these are just 3 different examples to kind of give you a feeling of how we can use these 3 reasons for behavior to figure out what's really going on. Because what we want to do is address the underlying root causes, the deep reasons underneath the behavior. Because if we're just reacting to the behavior itself, we might be missing the boat entirely, and we're not addressing the cause of the behavior. Therefore, the behavior is going to keep perpetuating itself. All right? So remember, when you're doing this, always ask yourself, what is the underlying reason for my child's behavior? What unmet needs might be at play here? What's really going on? What might they need that they're not getting that might be the cause of what is manifesting? And how can I help my child dissolve the tension around this issue or around this control pattern? Okay, often children will engage in these types of control patterns, as I talked about, and they might have been doing these for days, weeks, months, even years before bed. Okay, but what we want to do is help to dissolve the tension around that. So we want to ask ourselves, how can I help dissolve the tension around this issue or control pattern? You see, children can develop all types of different control patterns, and there's all types of different issues. So it's virtually impossible for me to tell you exactly what to do, because there's so many circumstances involved in your own unique case with your own unique child. That's why we want to ask ourselves these questions and start to become more creative and think about this. How can I help to dissolve the tension around it? You know, rather than getting wound up and focusing on the control pattern or on the issue itself and making that become a bigger issue, if we do that with our children, then the tension just builds around it. Instead, we want to dissolve it. We want to focus on dissolving the tension around the issue that we're facing or around the control pattern that our child is tending towards. And most importantly, when you're helping your child through this process, remember, laughter is the best medicine. And every tear heals. Okay? Laughter, natural giggles, crying, raging, tantrums, meltdowns, all these things are wonderful ways that we heal naturally. They're part of our inborn repair kit for stress. So we want to help and support our children through that. So if you like this webinar, you can learn more. There's lots more webinars on our website at parentlearningclub.com. You can go to parentlearningclub.com/members to access your own account. And if you're watching the live webinar right now, then this is being recorded and it will be uploaded to your parentlearningclub.com membership site in your account. You'll be able to access this recording forever in your account area. So you go to parentlearningclub.com/members and you log in, you go to my account, you'll be able to find this recording. You can find any other webinars that you may have purchased as well in there as well and watch them as many times as you like. And you might also find other webinars on other subjects, and in those we talk about how to use democratic parenting to approach different behavioral issues or challenges with parenting. And you can access those as well. So now, if anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask them. Inside the application for the webinar, there's a little box that says questions, and you can post your question in there. Okay, we have a question from Melissa. Melissa asks, how do I stop the negotiating with my 3-year-old? It's always one more story, but it's never just one more story. Do I just stand firm and let her cry? Great question, Melissa. So yes, you're right there. You've probably figured out at this point that the stories have become her control pattern, her way of prolonging sleep and avoiding the going to sleep. So yes, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to stand firm and you want to set that healing limit that I talked about. So you set a firm, gentle, kind limit. And the healing aspect really comes from your connection and the empathy and the care and love that is being communicated through your tone of voice, through your presence, through your attention, and through the words that you're saying at that point as you set that limit and as you let her know that, you know what, sweetie, we're not going to read another story. That was the last story. It's time for bed. And she'll say, no, one more. And she, you can start to hear the desperation and the emotions build up in her voice as you set that limit and as she starts to resist that, and you just reaffirm that limit. The moment you give in is the moment you lose the opportunity to heal, and the moment the control pattern reestablishes itself. So whatever you do, don't give in. At the moment you start to set a limit, a healing limit, then you want to maintain that limit. The only time you deviate from that rule is if you determine that the request is actually something that they legitimately need, like, for example, they need to go to the bathroom or something that they actually do need, and it's not just a control pattern, but something that you can actually help them process and a real need. But otherwise, you want to stand firm in setting that limit and just listen to them and let her cry. So try that out, Melissa. The best thing to do is, because now that you know that this is going to come up and there might be a lot of feelings there and she might cry for a long time, it might escalate into a full tantrum and a lot of sobbing, which is a good thing. Remember, that's a good thing, because that's where the deep emotional healing happens, as those feelings get completely drained through the tears. So what you want to do is just schedule perhaps a little bit more time. Maybe go to bed a little bit earlier if you can manage that in your schedule, or start the reading a little bit earlier so that you can allow for some extra time to listen to those tears, so that you don't get too worn out and tired before she falls asleep and those tears are drained to completion. Because that's the biggest challenge for many parents, is as they start to listen to these feelings and when these emotions come up, they get tired after a while. And if you get, because especially at night, oftentimes we've had long days ourselves, we haven't had time to rest, and we have so many unmet needs ourselves, so it feels like almost too much to ask for us to be present and to listen to our child. So prepare yourself. That's why it's important to prepare yourself. Do what you can to resolve some of your own tensions and pressures and demands in your life and in your schedule, so that you can be more present and be more patient and be less overwhelmed yourself. Because we can easily get overwhelmed from stress ourselves. That's why it's really important for us to have someone to listen to our feelings. I don't know if you read my book, Democratic Parenting, but there's an entire chapter on adult-to-adult listening time, which outlines a practice that you can use with other adults where they listen to you, so that you can train your feelings too and have someone just listen to you without giving you advice and giving their opinion or trying to coach you and counsel you through your feelings. The adult-to-adult listening time is a time when we can have someone listen to our feelings and process them however we need to, just like we want to do so for our children. Okay, so give that a try. Just schedule extra time, and if you make sure your own needs are met and take some time to be more present for your child, it'll probably go a little bit easier for you. And it is difficult to let our children cry, because it triggers, again, it's counterintuitive. It triggers some instinctual drive in us to meet our children's needs. And back hundreds and thousands of years ago, when we were hunter-gatherers and survival was a lot more difficult, and usually at that point, children were attached to us, especially the young children, were attached to us all the time. And so when they cried, sometimes their very survival was at risk, and it triggers an instinctual response for us to rush to their aid. So this instinct is still within us. So when we hear our children cry, that gets triggered. But we just have to remember that if we're sure that their needs are met, then we don't have to hush them. We don't have to soothe them. And at that point, we can rest assured that what they really need is to process these strong feelings. And through crying is one of the most effective ways for them to do that. So give that a try, and give it a reasonable try. Don't just try it once, but remember, it's a practice. It's something we need. We learn to. It becomes easier with time, because at first it's very counterintuitive, and it brings up all types of our own feelings and our own fears. So give it a try, and I hope to hear from you and how it goes. Send us an email, I'd love to hear how that goes for you. Okay, we have another question from Jill. Jill asks, when I go to change my son into his pajamas, he starts to giggle uncontrollably and grabs on to his clothes so we can't change him, and it's impossible to even get his attention. Well, okay, so, as we mentioned earlier, that one of the natural instincts we all have to heal from tension and stress is laughter and giggles, okay? So it might just be a way for your son is naturally trying to process. He's trying to play. So what he's really communicating there is that he has a desire to kind of play and to connect with you and to laugh and to process perhaps some of the tension that he might feel around bed, okay? So that's one thing, one possibility. So again, you have to first determine the root cause, the underlying reason that he's behaving this way and he's not listening to you, okay? But what you want to do from there is to set that firm yet kind limit, okay? The way to do that is, again, to follow those steps that I outlined and then just, let him know firmly that it's now time to put on his pajamas. Another option for you to do is to dissolve the tension around the whole play aspect there, around the pajamas and the bedtime. So you might, again, schedule a little extra time before bed, knowing ahead of time that he's going to do this because this is a pattern that happens again and again. So you know that he's going to start to giggle and ignore you and grab his clothes so you can't change him. But what you want to do then is to turn that into a game and go into that with him. Follow his lead a little bit. Give him the attention and the connection and the play that he's so desperately seeking that he needs to try to engage in that in an act of defiance with you too. So take out the defiance and enjoy that with him. Play with him a little bit. And if you schedule enough time, extra time for that to happen, then you won't feel the pressure and the stress that might come with trying to get into bed on time. So, and that, again, you might have to schedule this for a week or even a few weeks, even a month sometimes for this to happen every night until the tension and the patterns finally dissolve. But if you can tell me exactly how old your son is, that'll also give me a little bit more insight into perhaps some of the underlying needs they might have or different approaches that you can take with your son, because the child's age is very important in determining what might be the underlying cause and how to approach the child. So he's 5 years old. Okay, so at 5 years old, then he can likely change himself. Okay, so at that age, what you want to try and do is you want to help him change himself. So, but if you kind of usually just resort to putting the clothes on him or forcing on losing your patience on him and getting upset and then just stuffing his clothes on, it's in some ways he might discover that that's a way to get more attention and connection with you. So you want to dissolve that pattern, that need, and give him the attention and connection in other ways. So again, if you just schedule a little bit more time, maybe you schedule, instead of doing the self-directed play before getting ready for bed period, in this webinar, when I outlined the 90-minute formula before bed to make the graceful transition easier, instead of doing a self-directed play, you might schedule some play attention time with him. That way you can meet his underlying need for that attention and connection, and therefore the giggling and that won't come up at bed. So you can try that. You can try the setting the kind limits. That might be a way to do it. You can try the connective communication, and therefore the connective communication is a very important way to establish a more respectful relationship with our children, a type of communication pattern where trust and respect is the main thing, and there's no need to raise your voice or to use threats or to get upset with your child, because the problem of using threats and punishments or raising your voice and getting caught in these patterns of getting upset, and that's the only way that your child listens to you, is that finally you lose your patience and you freak out, and then finally they realize, okay, it's not playing anymore, I better listen to mommy. If we fall into that pattern, eventually the potency again of our anger just loses its power, and then we have to get more and more upset, or the threats and punishments have to get more and more severe. So we want to reverse that trend and avoid that path entirely by using connected communication. And that way we reach through to your child to connect with their heart, and we use a tone of voice where we show them how much we love them and how much we're connected, which meets a lot of their needs that can be at play when they start to defy us. So there's I would say practice the connected communication. You might set those firm limits and try to and set the firm limits so that he puts his clothes on, so it becomes an activity for him. And to help with that, knowing that this is a pattern for him, it might take some time to break that pattern. Schedule extra time for him to put his pajamas on. Expect it to take half an hour, and while during that time, work on dissolving the tensions around that, so that it no longer becomes a control pattern. You want to take all the power out of that, because if he finds that a source of power, he might be giggle because he knows that he can control you, he can manipulate and trigger your emotions by grabbing his clothes and by ignoring you, and that that becomes a way for him to meet his needs for autonomy, to feel more empowered. And also, like we know that for some children, if their need for attention is not met, bad attention becomes better than no attention or not enough attention. So by meeting their needs for attention, you can play attention time and other times during the day. That helps dissolve that pattern as well. And it reinforces the connection with their child. Another thing you might also want to be aware of is the entire routine leading up just before the pajamas time. Because if your child is not feeling connected to you up until that point, then this might be their grab, pardon the pun, grab for your attention and your connection by grabbing their clothes and resisting and defying your request to put their pajamas on. So if you can make sure that their connection is well established leading up to that time when they put on their pajamas, they might just forget about that pattern, because there's no longer a need to resort to that pattern in order to feel that connection and to feel your emotional attention on them whenever they are defying you. Okay, great. Next question by Leslie. She asked, when we say goodnight to our daughter, very often she starts to jump around in the bed and mess around rather than laying down calmly. Does that mean we haven't given enough time for the transition, or should we insist on her laying down? Great question, Leslie. Well, without knowing the entire routine that you have before bed and without knowing all the circumstances in your life, it's impossible for me to really answer that question precisely. So that's what you need to do, is you need to look at your child's overall life and their environment and all the influences and all the ways that different types of pressure and stress might be able to come into their lives. And maybe that's exactly it, that you didn't allow enough time for this transition, that she hasn't had enough time to settle down. Because by jumping around and messing around, that's a sign that she just needs to move. Perhaps she needs to have a little bit more exercise during the day. She hasn't processed that. Perhaps there's a food that she's taken at dinner time, or a dessert that, with too much sugar that's overstimulating to her. Or perhaps it is a buildup of pressure or stress that has happened. And it may have also developed to this point into a type of control pattern at this, where you need to also insist on setting a limit. So what I would say is we need to approach these things from multiple angles. First, definitely look at the transition and try to make that, make extra time to help wind down, reduce the stimulation in the evening, or make sure that her need for processing physical stimulation or getting enough exercise is met, so she doesn't need to jump around. She feels relaxed and ready for bed. And then the next part is to set that firm limit with her to help her transition to bed, so that you don't allow any deviance from her relaxing and going to sleep. The way to do this is using connective communication, which creates that nice connection, loving with your child, so that they don't feel betrayed by your anger, by your impatience, and so that they know that you're there with them. And that, because if you don't use a kind limit but use a harsh limit, then that can create further tension and stress by increasing the sense of disconnect with your child. That's why we use the connective communication when setting these types of verbal limits with your child. So set that limit, and you want to jump right on your child and stop them as soon as possible in a loving, gentle, and kind and connective way from jumping around, from messing around. So you need to interfere with that pattern, stop it as soon as possible, but you don't have to do it in a harsh way. But you do need to, express firmness behind your expression when you're using the connective communication. So connection, love, at the same time, firmness when you're setting that limit. And you'll probably have to do it again and again. Okay, and the key again is not to lose your patience. Okay, because that can just enhance the tension and the pressure and the stress around the whole experience. So you might set the limit, and your child settles down, and then you leave the room, and then 5-10 minutes later you hear them bouncing around, messing around again. And as soon as you hear it, as soon as that deviance happens, you want to jump right in, set that limit, and stop it as soon as possible. And that starts to kind of create the pattern and embed the culture where they listen to you and they start to follow your limits. You don't have to keep repeating them because they respect the limits that you set. Okay, so it looks like that's all the questions we have for tonight. So I want to thank you very much for your attention and your time. And every single day, give your child all your love. Give yourself that same love too, so you can keep your emotional fuel tank filled. And together, we truly can build a brighter future.